If you look at an organization like ICC, 10 years ago, they were making $50 million a year. Today, they're making $100 million a year. And every year, and you can see the graph, it looks like a private organization. It's up and to the right, growing year over year, more and more revenue. And this is despite losing that many times in the courts.
This is episode 89 of the Fire Protection Podcast, powered by InspectPoint. I want to welcome my guest, Scott Reynolds from UpCodes, co-founder of UpCodes and CEO, to the podcast today. I've been wanting to get UpCodes on for a while. I know how much the fire protection industry uses them and just the construction industry in general, of how essentially taking any public construction building or fire code and kind of putting it out to the public. It's a big depot, as we say in the podcast, of anywhere you are in the US, but it's heavily searchable. It's also, there's AI involved with it where you can essentially ask it any question and it'll spit out and give you the amended code wherever you're at. So it's been super helpful, I know, in the industry, and we've been wanting to get Scott or Garrett, his brother, on to talk about it. And it was great. We got into a lot of different futuristic ways that AI is going to help our construction industry and where it could benefit us with the labor problem and all that. But yeah, on to the podcast, and thanks again for listening. Take care. Scott, what's going on?
Not too much. Good to see you, Drew, and thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, you've been on my list for probably a few years to have UpCodes and you or your brother on for some time now. The fire protection industry's talked a lot about you guys and got you on here. So thanks for joining.
Well, it is a small world, so it's nice to connect the dots. And any way we can engage and talk to the community, we always take up that opportunity and love to do it.
Yeah, I mean, recently I've utilized your guys' platform on some renovation projects that I'm doing here too, on a house project. It is so powerful. It's incredible being able to talk to plan reviews at the town, engineers, architects. So it is crazy what it's allowing me to be able to do. And I don't know building codes that well, right? And they're deep, but this has allowed me to almost be an expert over people that have been doing it for 30 years.
Well, I would say very few people know the code inside out. No, there are some incredible code experts out there, but a lot of people are in your shoes. And I mean, I myself are, in a very similar spot, but basically the tool is what we wish we had 10 years ago. When I was in the industry working in architecture firms, it's what I wish I had, going from academia, jumping into practice for the first time, realizing you really don't know how a building actually gets put together. Like, what's the reality? What are all the codes? And long story short, it's what we wish we had. A lot of the team comes from industry, coming from the engineering side, the department side, or architecture side. So I think we're all very passionate about, again, just building that thing we wished we had when we were actually in these firms and these departments.
The collaboration piece of it's pretty cool as well. So we'll get in the weeds in a second. I guess, Scott, what is your background? Where did you come from? Who are you with? Right? Yeah, I'll do an intro to this, but love a little background on you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, I come from the architecture side. Studied architecture. Just love the creativity, love the design side of putting buildings together. And I think when you're in school, there's not a lot of restraints, and you can do free form design. And then during practice, my first job actually turned out to be in Hong Kong, and I worked there for a couple of years. And I think that's really where the rubber hits the road. You're saying, okay, let's transition to the real world and understand how to actually design these projects. Right. I was more or less the desk jockey that's just sending the codes and regulation research on the ground in these projects in mainland China to the design team, either at the time Sydney or Melbourne, and then later on in New York City, and really, was hitting my head against the wall trying to figure out the codes, trying to communicate them, trying to email these things, trying to dig into there. So eventually transferred to the New York City office, and this is with KPF at the time. Oh yeah, worked in the New York City office, but then lo and behold, domestic codes here in the US are even more stringent. They're more complex for good reason. I think we have probably the healthiest and the most robust codes in the world, but that also comes with a lot of difficulty in putting them together, parsing them, applying them to projects, doing the communication, doing the project management. So I was working in New York City and decided, okay, there's got to be a better solution for this. Why are we printing out updates to the code, stapling them into the pages of the books, into the binders, trying to maintain these physical libraries? There's got to be a better tool. And that's where I connected with my brother, who comes from the software engineering side. And man, this is maybe nearly 10 years ago. But yeah, we said, okay, let's build a software solution and see if we could put in some structured workflows here. And it was meant as a side project, but it just got more and more traction. Started in New York City. It started growing pretty rapidly, expanded to California. Fast forward to today, we serve all the states, do the federal level, major cities, and expanding into more local jurisdictions.
Yeah. You're getting more niche too, right? I know, you don't just have building codes in there. You're getting into the fireside too, right?
Yeah. And, it's a lot of demand and pull from the users, from the community. And while we started with a lot of the codes that architects might look at, we rapidly started to expand into fire protection engineering, GCs, trades, fire departments, planning departments, building departments. So it's really, really spread. And we continue to spread today. I mean, we have, if you count up all the individual code sections, like 10.12.2, that being a code section, there's over 6 million sections of code on the website today going across the US. And again, federal, state, city level.
Yep.
I think it's now 12,000 of those sections get updated every month. So it's just this enormous kind of repository of codes and regulations that's constantly shifting and changing.
Yeah. I guess, how do you stay on top of updating it all?
So huge effort. I think over half the team is dedicated to that. So we have over 30 people that is their core focus. We've spent years and literally millions of dollars building the infrastructure that could actually monitor these sites. I think there's over 600 sources, government sources and otherwise, that come together, and we integrate amendments into those, monitor changes or any new adoptions coming out and put that in. But the goal is to make the interface very simple. But I think that it in a way doesn't show the complexity of behind the scenes of what actually goes on to keep these things up to date and integrate local amendments and changes and updates to the code.
Yeah, we struggle a little bit with that, and I think we're one of the best at doing it. And we're mainly on this niche of fire protection, and inside of fire protection, we're essentially inspection, testing, and maintenance. So every state is on different code set, right? Or how they're adopting those NFPA codes or their local codes, right? But then sometimes state goes into city, and it's very complex, especially if you're a company in a variety of different jurisdictions. How do you manage that at scale? You don't have somebody on staff to do that all the time. Even the big companies don't.
And I think that's very much what we want to tackle. Like, we do have, an enormous team on staff to tackle that. And that's part of the value add, is like we can do that and then amortize the cost of keeping up of all these adoptions and changes and giving that out to the community. Because we can do it once, we can do that research, and then we have over 800,000 users a month on the site, and they all get to benefit from that research. Now, I can't say I see you're wearing an FDNY hat. New York City does a fantastic job of, getting the code, getting the updates, giving you kind of a heads up. Okay, here, a couple months out, or even a year or more out, here's the change. California does a pretty good job. A lot of other states do a great job. Some jurisdictions are a little bit slower. There's budget constraints and there's challenges, but they are a little bit slower, and they're the other side of the spectrum. It's not a year heads up when the code's going to change. It could be a retroactive notice. Right. It's like, hey, effective date 2 weeks ago. We're just releasing the codes today. Sometimes not online. So, we're like, the team is calling them. They're, literally trying to track down these people, saying like, hey, you said there was going to be a change. We haven't seen anything. Where is the information? Where are the meeting notes? And just constantly pulling on these threads across hundreds and thousands of these jurisdictions across the country.
Yeah, it's so I guess you get finding probably the smaller towns and smaller cities are tougher to, if they adopt local whatever, right? And it's not state adopted. So you have this huge depot of all these codes, right? Building codes, ICC, IBC, IFC, then down to some of the NFPA ones even. Highly recommend checking out, anybody listening to this, go check out your guys' platform. But what are you doing different than just having all the codes and making them searchable?
Yeah, and I would just say we just do the adopted codes. So if California adopts, let's say like the IBC and they integrate amendments, or say Ohio, that's
sure.
what we host those adopted codes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So we view that as the start line. It's just how do we get all those codes together into one place and make it easy for people to get in there and look at, and you can do that for free, completely free. You can get in, you can see all the code, you can copy, paste, hyperlink, you print, do whatever you want to do with the code. We consider that the foundational piece, just trying to get that code out there. Now, for the professional offices, for firms or departments, there's a lot of automation, project management, education, these layers that are put on top of that foundational layer of free and open access. And as the amount of data grows, like we were mentioning before, 6 million sections of code, it turns out this is really hard to parse. Like how do you all these changing updates? It's a moving target. How do you possibly parse it? And 2 to 3 years, no, more like 3 years ago, we didn't quite have an answer for that. We're saying, okay, this huge depot of data is expanding and expanding. How do we help the users parse it, answer the code questions really quickly? And that is when LLMs and AI kind of burst onto the scene. They've been around for a while, but I think it was ChatGPT 3 or 3.5 really made a splash. Sure. And for us, we're like, hey, this it's powerful. It needs to be reined in quite a lot. I'm sure we could get into that, but it was a very good solution, and it gives a really nice way to parse massive amounts of data into a very digestible way. And we think about it more like a router. It's not necessarily going to answer every question you have, but rather encourage you to get to the right sections of code. Mm-hmm. And so many times we'll hear, someone's in the building code, not knowing that there's a section in the fire code that they also need to consider, or maybe the electrical code. But how do we synthesize all of those together into one place and then route you to all those different sections? Like, hey, go look at these areas of the building code. Go look at these ones of the fire code. Here's the electrical code. So really trying to build scalable ways to encourage people into the correct places of the code and to navigate through there.
Yep. Yeah. And again, personal experience is like, it's looking at the floor joist and, all right, this is where I have to be versus, is a crawl space, exterior grade, kind of where we need to kind of place that. But it actually referred me to the fire code, because if it's a sprinklered residential structure, I didn't have to have certain things in the joists, right? Mm-hmm. So I would have known that. I wouldn't have known to cross-reference over to the fire code, right? If I wasn't using the tool, I would not have known. And I don't think my contractor would have, or architect would have known.
It's hard enough if you're in the office behind your computer, but this is construction. People are on site. Yeah. Like imagine you're actually in the crawl space trying to answer that question. Right. You can't go into multiple systems or flip between books, hope you have the most updated one, hope you have the amendments integrated, right? Try to navigate through. Like you hopefully you have a phone on you or a tablet or something, but you can really, really rapidly get to that. And then we also add in, visuals and diagrams to actually unpack that. So you're in there, but like, okay, here's a wall of text, but how do you actually apply that thing? Like what does it actually look like on site? And how do you understand like the actual requirements when you're in the crawl space looking at that piece, whether you're on the build side or you're on the inspection side? It's challenging no matter who you are.
Yeah, the diagrams were killer. Like they were amazing to be able to reference, right? Because I could read code all day long, but if you see it in a diagram, that's what really resonates.
Not to go down a rabbit hole there, but I think so much of the industry knowledge is siloed. Like you might have someone who's really, really good at waterproofing, and maybe you have someone who's really, really good at insulation or sprinkler layout. Sure. an installment. But how do we help disseminate some of that knowledge to help train up the next generation or help train people who are jumping into a new jurisdiction or a new project type? And it's really trying to tap some of these professionals and kind of share knowledge. And I think a lot of our industry is very hesitant to share that knowledge. And you compare it against something like software engineering. You can go online and there's an entire community that'll jump in there. They're going to help answer your specific question and do education and teach you. But we don't see as much of that in construction. We're really trying to, you get these things out there so people can kind of self-serve, educate themselves and answer these pretty challenging code questions.
Yeah. I've been in fire protection for 22, I think it's almost 22 years now. And it's siloed, it's opening up, right? But also the coordination that I've heard over the years of coordinating with HVAC contractors and coordinating with a GC, like they know their trade. And the thing is, it all translates back to the building code, right? And if you can put that all together somewhere, you probably collaborate easier and faster and, don't have the pains you once did.
And I would say like people can be experts, but where that meets each other and those edges where it starts to join together is where you can find some issues. And I think we're seeing really nice advances in AI where it can start to kind of parse that and just be a second set of eyes. So like when these things came together, maybe when the FPE's work came together with the architect's work and it starts to overlay, almost like clash detection, except not geometry, but this time code. It's like, what's the clash detection on two different interpretations of the code, or maybe it didn't get documented in the right way. And that happens all the time. And I think you layer in specifications and now you're, creating a bunch of RFIs downstream. And we're fascinated. How much of this can you catch upstream? How much guardrails can we put in place? That second set of eyes, just someone sitting beside you being like, hey, heads up, this particular detail might not match, or what you're calling out here in the plan might not match the specification, might not match that local code. How much of that can we flag upstream and prevent some of these downstream issues?
Yeah, it would. I think it's you guys hit it at the right time, right? All these LLMs and the AI wave the last 2 or 3 years is beneficial because you had all this data, right? And now you can chug it through these engines, and this is just the speed and what it's going to do down the road. And I want to talk about the future here in a second, but those public LLMs I got a couple updates today on some new ones, and it's only been a month since the other ones have been out. So there's a lot in the public right now. How does that differ from what you guys are doing?
Yeah. So a lot of what we do is tying it directly back to the code. So, I'm sure all the listeners here have heard about hallucinations. A lot of the generic LLMs, like ChatGPT or Perplexity or Gemini, they can get a lot wrong. But, and this is a great comment I saw on YouTube. They said, what's the point of a calculator that's right 80% of the time, but you don't know which 80% of the time? And I just laughed when I read that, because that's exactly the case. Now, 80% is pretty generous when it comes to code, because it as it turns out, like there's a lot of gaps that these models have. But it's exactly that. It's saying, how do we put in the guardrails? How do we make these things a lot more reliable and then tie it back directly to the code? So that's a lot of what we do. It's saying, and literally instructing and constructing those guardrails, saying you cannot go to Reddit. Do not source Reddit. Like that training data is off limits. You cannot go to the wild west of the internet and try to answer a life safety code question. It has to come from the text of the code and constrain it down. Just to use an example, like the New York City. So New York City has multiple editions of codes. So when are you permitted? What code is applicable in that jurisdiction at that permit time? Use that snapshot of code, constrain the AI to just that code. So it's not, it's not pulling from maybe an Ohio amendment. It's not pulling from Florida. It's absolutely constrained to that point in that time.
Sure. Citing
it and then giving the text of the code and kind of encouraging users back into the code.
Right.
We don't want to create this black box where you throw it in a question, it comes out with an answer, and you have no idea where that came from or
Right.
what the fundamentals are. We want people to understand the fundamentals,
Yep.
but make sure they get to the right code in doing that.
Yeah, it seems like I'd be diving deeper, right? It put out an output of the question I asked it, and then it just put me deeper into the code, which helped explain a lot better.
Right. Yeah. And you know, you've been in the profession for a while, and you know the code, but what happens if you're 1 year, 2 years out of school, you know, in very little familiarity with the code? At least I certainly didn't have. You know, how do we get those people trained up and educated? I think the industry for a long time has been master apprentice style, where you're literally knocking on the door of the person who's done it for 2-3 decades and trying to get their code knowledge.
Yep.
But how do we equip that person to get into the code, get familiar with it, reduce the barriers to actually like learning those fundamentals?
Yeah, and how do you with the new tools out there like yours and ours being released and just other AI tools, how do you can't be fully reliant on that either, right? Because then I don't know if you learn the same, and I think everybody's kind of a little wary about that. Of like, hey, how do we learn in the future with these AI tools that we have?
Yeah, and just to double click on the point about they're not perfect today. I was listening to a podcast with Andre Karpathy. He was the director of AI at Tesla, and then he was a co-founder at OpenAI who introduced ChatGPT. So he's deep in it. He's one of these kind of like godfather figures of AI. But on a recent podcast, he was saying as powerful it is, and agents are incredibly powerful. He is saying it's going to take 10 years before the agents are properly tooled to actually do vertical specific like construction tasks. And I think
interesting.
I think I really kind of believe that. I know there's a lot of hyperbole. I know there's a lot of headlines about like AI replacing jobs. I don't think that's happening anytime soon in our industry. It is powerful as they are. They're very far from actually, getting in and doing this work. There's a lot of tooling, a lot of guardrails that have to happen. And I think, I think the human in the loop, combining the AI with that professional is the best possible outcome. So it's the second set of eyes. It's catching some errors. It's automating some of the routine tasks. But ultimately, it is an aid to that person, which is important because they're not perfect. And I don't, people might disagree, but I don't think they're going to be perfect anytime soon. But they can be an excellent sidekick while you're working.
Oh, yeah. And it's, I think we're calling ours assistants. And yeah, it's not replacing it, but it does speed it up quite a bit. And it's going to, that review process on these inspections, and we have a design assistant coming out as well. It's checking your design, right? Since you came from the architecture side and know the engineering side, have you seen anything out there that is utilizing? You guys are more on the code side, but what about the actual design side? Have you seen any CAD programs that are utilizing AI right now?
Yeah, great question. From a lot of what we've seen is, I don't want to call it like a spell check, but it's some way to kind of check the plan to a very kind of limited state. Sure. I think the progress on the drafting side and the CAD or Revit side is actually surprisingly small from our perspective of what we've seen. One interesting company out there, Hierarch, geared towards the home builder segment and industry. I know that's where they started, this kind of generative design. And I think they've shifted a little bit into more of like the project management side of home building and client relations and the documentation side of it. But I know they're continuing to push on that. But I would say I don't think that's like a primary thing they do today. And a lot of the initiatives we've seen on the pure AI generation on CAD just hasn't gone as far as we thought it would by now.
Yeah, it's it's interesting to see what that, because there's a potential there, but I think you still need the person there to do the work. It's just it'll review it. I think there will be a review process of that, and that's a tough one to like, hey, I want a X amount square foot house at this height and this look. Like it's not producing that for you anytime soon, right?
I think the massing, like the getting the very broad strokes, I think there's been inroads done there. And I know if like Hypar, I believe does that, TestFit does that. So looking at the general massing, but I think where we haven't seen is when you get that initial massing, how do you get into the details? Like, how do you actually, what is, well, like, going back to fire sprinklers, what does the fire sprinkler look like? What is the electrical outlet plan look like? What is the door detailing, the waterproofing detailing? We are so far, or at least what we've seen, at least very, very far from that level of detail.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see what we roll out with the fire alarm side and how that morphs over the next couple of years. Again, it's just an assistant right now on the review, but and with that, I think there's some potential into the plan review side, right? Mm-hmm. Where you are submitted a set of drawings and you have to review that, right? It's not drawing it, right, but you're reviewing a set of plans. I think there's definitely potential there.
Well, and I think you're the exact example of what Andre Carpatho is talking about, which is like it takes time to deploy it and make it specialized for a given industry and a given workflow. Like, here's a fire sprinkler layout, but as powerful as AI is, like it's going to be up to you to take it across that last mile and adapt it to this workflow. But I think yourselves tackling that, and then other companies will tackle different workflows in other areas of construction, but other industries as well. It will take a lot of builders and a lot of developers to implement and actually make these things useful and make or enable the implementation across a lot of these firms.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting times for sure. What I had Jim Pauly from NFPA on a couple months back, and he and NFPA have talked a lot about the Pro Codes Act and everything going on there. I know you're heavily involved with some of the Pro Codes Act. I guess from your perspective, love to give an overview and then kind of how you see that kind of in your world more in general.
Yeah, for sure. And I did listen to the podcast. So great conversation. And, just taking a step back, I think our organization, NFPA, other organizations, I think have the same goal, which is to make the built environment safer, get the codes out there, let people apply to the buildings, and ultimately just create more resilient and safer homes. So I think, I think we're coming from the same place. Now, on some of these areas, like we do, fall in different spectrums, a bit different beliefs in some areas. One of the sides, and I've kind of mentioned this before, that we take is just free and open access to the codes. Now, this has been a topic that's been debated for, over 20 years at this point. And it's been litigated that whole time through. Now, I think the big areas we would disagree with a lot of the SDOs is the kind of track record of a lot of litigation. And then a second argument, which is like, how do they make money? But starting on the first one, the track record of litigation, I think a lot of people, or the SDOs, like to say, it's a mixed bag. The courts are all over the place. That is not our understanding. That's not our read. If you go through the case law, it's very, very clear. And this goes back to 2002, SB CCI in Texas, first VEC. SB CCI would go on to form ICC. And just to give a quote here, but the judge there said, "Our short answer is that as law, the model codes enter the public domain and are not subject to the copyright holder's exclusive prerogatives." And that same message has been said over and over and over, from a case with ASTM versus Public Resource in 2018.
Right.
As a matter of common sense, this cannot be right. Access to the law cannot be conditioned on the consent of a private party. And we've been through our own litigation. So ICC sued us. The court said, "The court concludes, however, that the case law is ultimately consistent. It compels a holding that the I-codes as adopted are in the public domain because they are in fact enacted state and local laws binding on the enacted jurisdiction's constituents."
Sure.
A private party cannot exercise its copyrights to restrict the public's access to the law. So it's very, very clear. I mean, actually, one of these cases went to the Supreme Court and they said no one can own the law. So you have a very, very clear picture of where the courts have ruled and where they've fallen. We have a page on our website that chronicles all this. I've pulled, a couple quotes there, but there's probably like 20 or 25 quotes across,
sure,
I think 8 or 9 different cases. So it's a very clear landscape on the court side.
Yep.
And what the American legal system has told us. Now, what ended up happening more recently, I think, as this mountain of case law started to accrue against a lot of the SDOs, a couple of them have said, okay, let's go to DC and see if we can try this run around the courts. Can we go to DC? Can we lobby and can we try and introduce a bill that would go around the American legal system?
Right.
And that is the Pro Codes Act. And now what they're arguing there is that, okay, we need copyright to make money to go on and fund the codes.
Sure.
And that's another big kind of disagreement that we have with the SEOs, saying, actually, data would suggest the opposite. So despite what they're saying about, difficult financial situations, they are nonprofits. So they have to disclose their revenue in 990. Yep. So yeah, you can go on to nonprofit, I forget what it's called, but there's a website that chronicles it all. So you can go see their documents. If you look at an organization like ICC, 10 years ago, they were making $50 million a year. Today, they're making $100 million a year. And every year, and you can see the graph, it looks like a private organization. It's up and to the right, growing year over year, more and more revenue. And this is despite losing that many times in the courts. That many judges saying, hey, the UpCodes as adopted are in the public domain. Despite that, revenue up into the right.
Yep.
CEO gets paid 10 times the national average of a nonprofit CEO. And if you look at those 990s for ICC, I think it's around 80% of the revenue does not come from selling publications. So it does not come from selling the codes or the law. It comes from things like accreditation, training, and product certification. So or product testing. So the lion's share of the revenue does not even come from the codes.
The code side, yeah.
And it's a very, very flush business operating, despite the fact that we have been putting codes out free for everyone to view and these laws out there for nearly 10 years now. Other nonprofit and public interest groups have been doing the same for the same amount of time. You would not tell at all when you look at their revenue.
Yeah.
And
so that's the dispute. That's what they're kind of claiming for the Pro Codes Act, I guess.
Yeah, saying we need to charge and that needs to fund the development. But I mean, you can look at the data yourself, or you can listen to all the judges who have inspected their documents. So they've tried to make this argument to the courts as well. It's been rejected every time. The courts, they look through all their financials, they look through all their documents, they hear expert testimony, and they all have come out and said, no, that argument doesn't hold water. In fact, I'll give you another quote. This is from, again, SBCCI versus ICC, or who would go on to become ICC. It is difficult to imagine an area of creative endeavor in which the copyright incentive is needed less. So they go through, they look at the financials, they see the amount of money that's being made, and they unequivocally say that it is not true. They do not need that incentive to continue operations. So they've done an X-ray through their organizations and conclusively say that is not true. And you can look at the public filings and see the revenue. It says the same story.
Yeah. You have a good grasp on this. It's funny because in the fire protection industry, right? I think the other side of the coin hasn't been, shown too much. And again, I think what you're dealing with the different organizations probably differs from the organization or kind of vertical that you're in. I think so. It's it is still public codes though, right? And yeah, it's an interesting over the last year to learn about the act. And I actually didn't know some of that, how it was, the law and the courts kind of viewed it as one, and then trying to lobby is kind of the next potential avenue to get it.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
on the lobbying side, we never thought we would be in DC meeting with some of these
Right.
policymakers, when you start to solve some, pain points and what you think is kind of a niche area or industry, and then you end up on the Hill. But talking to a lot of the offices, I think it's just really surprising for them. They might have heard from the other side saying like, oh, we need to make money. And they'll say that to us. They're like, don't you think they need to make money? And we just bring the facts. We just and show. It's like, well, you should pull up their 990s. Look at the revenue. And does the story you see in the data match what they told you? And you could just see the shock on their faces, because I think there is a little bit of muddying the waters. Trying to say one story when the ground truth just doesn't support that. So we're just trying to shine light on it. We're like, hey, look, like there's two sides to this. Let's just, try and make this as transparent as possible and bring all the voices to the table.
Yeah. And I the point of, hey, you need to support the progression of codes. I think everybody's in support of that. It's just how much do you need to actually do that, right? And I think there's a problem in the codes in general. Is there's a lot of people aging out of those codes on those code standards, right? I'm on a few technical NFPA committees, and I'm the youngest person there, and I'm middle aged, right? So that's not a good sign. So I don't know, and I don't know the solution. Obviously there needs to be some younger talent brought into some of these technical committees, but a lot of times younger people maybe don't know how or don't want to get involved. So who sits on those committees at that point?
Well, yeah, I think it's a major problem. When you look at code officials, they did a survey. 80% of the respondents say they're going to retire in the next 15 years. Yeah. So you have the vast majority of this workforce in 15 years is going to retire. And who's going to take their spot? And going back to the earlier conversation, if so much of the industry is the master apprentice style, where you get in, you learn from the person who's done it for 20, 30 years, what happens if that person is not in the fire department? What happens if they're not in the engineering firm or the architecture firm or in the GC? Who do you learn from?
Yeah.
And so how do you incentivize people to jump in, but also how do you give them the tools to learn? Yep. And I can't say we have the answer there either, but I do think reducing barriers to getting into the code, making it much easier to educate yourself, like breaking down these silos of knowledge will help to some extent with that. So, whether it's AI coming in and accelerating that learning curve, if it's layering on educational content to the codes, making that or putting that at people's fingertips, might make that hurdle to like jumping in there a lot less scary. And once you do jump in, getting up to speed a lot faster. How do you build up the skills on that front?
Yeah, that's be interesting to see the world in a couple of years in the construction industry. I think it's going to transform again, like you said from that podcast. It's going to take a little bit, but I think the adoption just in our fire protection industry over the last 6 to 12 months has been, and a lot of it's, the stock market and everything's jumped with AI. I think everybody's trying to utilize it in some capacity at this point.
Well, you go to a lot of these conferences and a lot of the talks are, and this is a quote, adopt or die when it comes to AI. And it's a lot about this kind of like fear mongering or, a lot of these headlines, like the clickbait style headlines, but very few people tell you what to do. Like what's a tactical way you could actually derive value and benefit from AI and get it into your practice. And I think that's that second piece that's missing quite a bit. Now, I think we'll get a lot more of it, like yourself, like deploying it to your users. I think we are in a unique space where we can work with the community and develop it kind of as a pair. And like tech companies or startups, or if they're building it internally at a bigger company, working as closely as possible with the community. So it's there's a voice in both directions.
Sure.
Because I think there's a huge amount of pushback where you just feel like something's rammed down your throat, or you're like, I didn't have a voice. I didn't have a voice at this table. What is this tool that's being pushed on me?
Sure.
And I think that's one of the challenges is how do we build it in concert or in as a pair, and then actually deliver real value and give people a way to deploy it where they get ROI and it works for the team.
And then they're utilizing it. Yeah. No, it's important on any product. You have to have the feedback from the people using it in the field or in the office or whatever. Yeah, this has been awesome. I think we chat again in maybe 6 months to a year and see where things have gone. Right. I do think things will be transforming over the next year. And how does that, I think it's more adoption of AI by the trades. And and it might not be fully embedded like it is in the legal world or the marketing world. I think there's an opportunity with our codes, that we live and die by. Right. So yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah. And maybe next time we talk, I can pick more of your brain. You being a key player and who will kind of roll out AI to a lot of the trades and how that works. I think everyone's going to have their own insights. And like you said, it's going to be a very interesting couple of years. But I think if we're all sharing insights, if we're working as closely with the community as possible, we can help kind of shape what that future looks like.
So you worked at KPF, right, in New York City?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Did you work on any New York City projects?
Well, actually, before, like predating this, when I was doing an internship at RMJM, we worked on one of the public schools. I think it was PS 51 or 52.
Okay. Yeah.
But was with KPF in the New York City office, but working on a range of projects and primarily international projects.
Any ones to highlight that you worked on?
Well, our studio was working on the Hudson Yards. I was not heavily involved in that, but that was like the flagship one of our studio there.
What Hudson Yards, do you know?
I should. I think it was split up between a couple different firms. I could point it out on the skyline. I don't know the name
That's funny.
offhand.
Yeah, I remember working on a lot of the sprinkler systems in
nice.
Manhattan West, which is right next to Hudson Yards. And I did a bunch of stuff in Hudson Yards while I was there. So I'm always eager to talk to people that were in the engineering architecture world and in New York City, in the last 20 years, because the buildings have been, I don't know, there's some really cool designs that have been created.
And there's not that many of them, but when there are, they are pretty spectacular. Like they are pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Just the super tall ones, like the, Central Park Tower. I got to work on Central Park Tower, which is like, I forgot. So it's 1 foot shorter than the Trade Center. So,
wow.
It's wild.
Yeah. It's a whole other scale. And, going back to my early career when I was working in Hong Kong, we had mainland China projects, and those buildings, it wouldn't be unusual to hit 100 stories. And when you get up there on the construction site and you go up the construction elevator, the rickety construction elevator, and just like the safety, is like the yellow construction tape, like, around the perimeter, and like
the elevator.
We're not harnessed. It's just a whole other world too. Like
I bet.
And especially at that height, right? You have the wind like whipping through the floor plate because there's no like obviously no facade.
No OSHA over there, right?
Yeah. It's I would hate to see the numbers, but of accidents. But I can't imagine.
You probably can't find them anywhere.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Unfortunately.
Well, Scott, this has been awesome. Thanks for coming on, and I'm sure we'll definitely keep in touch. And
absolutely.
Love seeing your path.
Yeah, I would love to stay in touch, and we'll keep an eye on everything that you're rolling out, especially on the AI front.
Well, where can everybody find you, or the product and all that?
So the product UpCodes. So if you search UpCodes in Google, it'll throw you right there. If you're curious to learn more about the law and the case history, we document it quite detailed. If you search UpCodes free law in Google, it'll bring you right there. Or UpCodes Pro Codes Act, and that'll kind of walk through a lot of the similar things, just a lot more in-depth documentation. For myself, I'm on LinkedIn. So if you search for Scott Reynolds UpCodes, that'll pop up on my LinkedIn, and I'm pretty active there. So love to connect with the community, love to chat with folks, and just kind of hear different ideas and different ways we can, make the day-to-day a little bit easier.
Yeah. It's a pleasure having you on, and it's been a good one.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Drew.
Thanks again. This has been episode 89 of the Fire Protection Podcast, powered by InspectPoint. I want to thank my guest, Scott Reynolds, again from UpCodes, on chatting everything on the dry side of code life, but it's near and dear to everybody in the fire protection industry's heart, and hopefully you enjoyed it. And I'll probably have Scott or Garrett on in 6 to 12 months just to catch up and see what they're doing. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again soon.